James Shepherd Pike was a journalist and Republican from Maine who had served Lincoln as ambassador to the Netherlands during the Civil War. He was initially a member of the radical wing of his party and advocated punitive measures against the defeated South, treason trials for the Confederate leaders, and the impeachment of Andrew Johnson for his conciliatory attitude towards the South. Pike wrote in support of the immediate enfranchisement of the freedmen and the forced immigration of the ex-Confederates. Pike became disenchanted with the disorders of Reconstruction during the first Grant administration, especially the subjection of the South under military government and the increasing reports of vigilantism and gross corruption. Pike joined the faction of the Liberal Republicans in 1872 to nominate Horace Greeley to contend with Grant. Previously known for his enthusiastic support for the rising Republican Party and for Lincoln, Greeley was charitable in peace and controversially advocated for universal pardons and the immediate re-enfranchisement of white Southerners. Greeley also signed a bond for the release of the captive Jefferson Davis from military prison, where the former president had been waiting for a treason trial that never came. Greeley lost spectacularly to Grant, and the unprecedented policies of martial law and political exclusion of white Southerners continued. Pike was energized by the social and political catastrophes of Reconstruction, and so made a visit to South Carolina in 1873 to witness what his former policies had wrought. He produced a series of articles reprinted in several northern newspapers, and later assembled them into the Prostrate State in 1874. Illiterate Africans, accustomed to the command and social dominance of Europeans, were not made capable or informed citizens, or granted Western customs or restraints, by fiat. Pike had gathered as much from reading journalism during the first Grant administration, and came to fundamentally change his views on Reconstruction. Pike concluded that the enfranchisement of the freedmen and their sudden elevation into state offices in Carolina had been a disaster for the quality of government and for race relations. The incompetence and corruption of the black demagogues and the carpetbagger entrepreneurs who had enabled them severely damaged prospects and existing traditions of racial order in the South, and introduced a new antagonism. Governor Robert Scott was an infamous example of the carpetbaggers, having arrived in South Carolina as one of Sherman's arsonists and finding political opportunity as an officer in the Freedmen's Bureau. Unwittingly addicted to opium because of a war wound, Scott had chosen compromised subordinates and signed state bonds to fund female entertainment in New York City. Once ousted from office, he fled to his native Ohio, never again to set foot on the state he misgoverned. Pike's work proved popular, and was a major source for Claude Bowers's Tragic Era, a popular history of Reconstruction in 1929, and, more significantly, for James Ford Rhodes's massive History of the United States, which began to be published in the 1890s. Contemporary historiography, inherently ideological and unwilling to consider the possibility that liberal civilization is not immediately communicable even to illiterates, has been forced to dismiss, damn, and ignore Pike. In spite of Pike's bona fides as an abolitionist, a Republican insider, and a humanitarian of his time, his change of heart about the consequences of Reconstruction is contrary to the ideological convictions of his critics. Pike's eyewitness accounts, legal testimony, and painstaking financial details of the corruption are dismissed as racism by Eric Foner and the Fashionable Academy. Pike's sentiments on race mirrored the leaders he had followed. Both Lincoln and Grant were frank in their beliefs that slavery being ended by the force of war, Africans were in conflict with the white population of the United States and did not have a future under the government of the victorious Union. Lincoln repeatedly called on freedmen to lead their fellow ethnics to Liberia and said of the racial differences that, quote, "We have between us a broader difference than exists between almost any other two races," and, quote, "It is better for us both, therefore, to be separated." Grant sought various schemes to Africanize several southern states by forcibly seizing property and expelling the white population, which had already begun under Sherman's orders on the Sea Islands of South Carolina and Georgia. Grant also negotiated the purchase of Santo Domingo to be a colony for the freedmen. This scheme, already negotiated by the president, failed in his Republican Senate by a single vote. These beliefs of race and separatism, universal and assumed in the 1860s and 1870s, are supposedly beyond the knowledge of the likes of Foner and the other critics of Pike, who would have the reader believe that this particular observer cannot be trusted because of his beliefs about race. Robert F. Durden, a 1957 biographer of Pike and an outspoken liberal on the race question, also pretends to be unaware of Grant and Lincoln's well-known racial opinions in his attempts to marginalize and discredit Pike. He reveals Pike's allegiance to the Free Soil Party in the 1850s and notes the racially exclusive goals of the movement meant to keep slavery and also free blacks out of the Western territories. In this, Durden claims to discover the hidden racial animus in Pike, and treats his subject as Dr. Freud might treat one of his unfortunate patients, peering back into his past to discover the complex that caused the later manifest madness. Presumably, the mad will see things, and thus their observations are discredited. Durden anticipates an uninformed reader, for the careful observer of Lincoln knows his 1854 Peoria speech, in which he claims the Republicans wish to preserve the West for, quote, "free white people," by excluding slavery. Durden expects his ignorant reader to be unaware of the strict laws of Illinois, Ohio, Oregon, and other states that excluded free blacks entirely, required hefty bonds as guarantees for good behavior, or even mandated the arrest and forced labor, to pay the fine, of any black found in the jurisdiction. The academic left conducts the debunking argument in bad faith, all while Pike's observations, interviews, and financial figures remain untouched by serious criticism. There is no criticism of the evidence because this is substantiated by other period sources, notably another Republican journalist and traveler through the South, Charles Nordhoff. The vital matter for the partisan interpreters of Pike is to cause the reader to fear the rhetorical devil words and so refuse to notice the evidence of experience. The ideological propositions are the focus, and not what can be seen or measured. Thus, Pike serves as the scientific source. Foner and friends are always reliable for the religious beliefs that confer status, the proper opinions and talking points that contradict the politically incorrect evidence. Pike is a worthy source on this most confused period of American history. George Bagby, Boothbay Harbor, Maine. Summer of 2024.